we've really focused on making sure that our project selection is very rigorous and that we pick the projects that are actually moving ahead. And so when you look at the portfolio now and you see arguably 3 of the most advanced copper projects in the Americas in the NOVA portfolio, and we have a royalty exposure to them, which is really the best spot to be.
Hello and welcome to Assay TV. I'm very pleased to introduce Alex Tsukernik, President and Chief Executive Officer of NOVA Royalty, and NOVA are building a royalty and streaming company focused on vital future-facing metals of copper and nickel, of course. And Alex, welcome back on Assay TV.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here again.
Yeah, so please share with us, what are you creating at NOVA that investors who are interested in exposure to copper should really be paying attention to right now?
Well, when we started the company in 2018, we felt that one of the most important things that was occurring was that copper was really emerging as not just a heavily used industrial metal, but a strategic metal. And you see that in terms of how it's used in the entire segment of the energy transition, from EVs to wind to solar. It really is the ubiquitous commodity. And like in any commodity, we felt that the best way to invest in the commodity is through a diversified royalty company with exposure to a large number of high quality projects. The royalty model, it really is a unique way because it gives you the benefits of the commodity price upside and the project upside, but you're not responsible for the capital or operating costs. And obviously, for what you see right now, you see a lot of inflation pressures on projects. That's also going to push up the prices over time as well, because it's just in terms of basic viability. And the royalty model is really the best way to participate in that. So what we've done since we began the company, we built a great foundation consisting really the most advanced major copper projects that are advanced into our production sort of in the next couple of years. So Josemaria is due for a construction decision in the second half of 2022. Taca Taca is scheduled for construction decision in 2023-24. The Copper World Complex is scheduled for a construction decision around 2024 per HUD-based recent guidance. And we have a whole number of other advanced copper projects also that are just behind these. So we really feel like what we're building is a multi-generational company that will give investors diversified royalty exposure across a range of really top-notch projects. So obviously right now the markets are very jittery and you see a lot of fear, which is understandable. At the same time, I think people are looking for a place that they can invest for the long term, which has the quality, which has the ability to grow, and also give them protection. Because I think that's obviously a very clear objective right now amongst a lot of people. So we're excited about the opportunities this market can bring for us. Because when we started the company, we really mapped out the whole world. Every major copper camp, every major deposit, and we've been in touch with those third-party royalty holders from the beginning, and we've now built a real company. And it's a great time for us to see if something can get done, and we can continue to build it out. More an emphasis on near-term cash flow projects, either producing or producing in the next couple of years, and that will give us hopefully a really good bridge of cash flows to our major projects, which is supposed to come online in the second half of this decade.
Yeah, so excellent. That's a wonderful rundown, and understand a lot of the efficiencies and the simplicity of a royalties copper investment for investors. But let's hone in a little bit more on what tangibly you've put together. Then you touched on some of the projects there within the portfolio. Could you take us through the sort of critical mass of your advanced major assets in a bit more detail?
Absolutely. So the focus of the company from the very beginning has been getting royalties on tier 1 copper projects. And so when you look at the most advanced projects in the portfolio, that's Taca Taca, Josemaria, and Copper World. And we also have a producing royalty on the Aranzazu copper mine, copper gold silver mine, which is owned by Water Minerals. And that covers most of our G&A expenses. That said, the bulk of the company's value is unquestionably in a development portfolio. And so what we've targeted really is the core of the copper development pipeline in the Americas. So we now own royalties on 4 of the top 10 copper development projects in the Americas. And so along with Taca Taca, Josemaria, and Copper World, we also own a royalty on Nueva Union, which is a joint venture between Teck and Newmont. And on top of that, we also own royalties on other major projects which are similar in size, which are Vizcachitas, which is Los Andes Copper, the West Wall project, which is Glencore and Anglo. So we really feel that we're building out a diversified base of projects which represent the bulk really in many ways of the next generation of major copper assets. In terms of specific development timelines, as I mentioned before, Josemaria is slated for a construction decision in the second half of 2022. Lundin Mining just acquired the project at the end of last year. They announced that they closed the acquisition in April of this year. Argentina has really emerged, particularly in Salta and San Juan, has really emerged, we think, as one of the most favorable, if not the most favorable place for large-scale copper project development, at the very least in the Americas. When you look at the levels of government support from the local level socially to the governors, to the provincial governments, and now increasingly the federal government. So it's really exciting to see the jurisdiction emerge to be so supportive for mining at a time when a lot of places are really struggling to provide the industry with that kind of support. So which is why we've acquired the royalties now in both Taca Taca and Josemaria. We've taken a very clear view on those provinces, which are super supportive of the sector, and the federal government is clearly making steps in the right direction. So we're excited to see that progress. First Quantum is very deep into permitting and detailed engineering at Taca Taca. Our royalty there, just as an example of what a royalty on a large scale copper mine can be. We own a 0.42% NSR on Taca Taca. The first stage mine plan, just the first stage, is forecast production between 200 and 250,000 tons a year of copper. So even at today's copper price, which is much lower than the recent past, that's approximately $7 million a year in revenue for the first 32 years. And that's excluding any expansions, assuming no commodity price upside. And this is a world-class project, which is unlikely to stay, we think, at the current forecast size. So, and that's really exciting when you can own these copper royalties on these major projects, which are actually moving ahead. The biggest challenge in this sector is really identifying the projects which have a chance to move forward, because the hurdles to getting one built are significant. So you really need to target the very top end of the sector with committed owners who have the capital capability, the technical capability, the government support, and the wherewithal to really see these things through. It's very rigorous, and then we pick the projects that are actually moving ahead. And so when you look at the portfolio now and you see arguably 3 of the most advanced copper projects in the Americas that know a portfolio, and we have a royalty exposure to them, which is really the best spot to be. So we're at a point where there's clear catalyst to our production. We have royalty exposure, which allows us to benefit from the positive things and doesn't expose us as much to the capital and operating costs. Obviously, that's a great place to be, and hopefully investors will see that this is how you want to participate in this entire trend, whether that's the energy transition, whether that's the copper market, whether you're just looking for a long-term cash flow story. I think Nova can fit a lot of different objectives for various people. So we're very excited about where things stand with the portfolio now.
Excellent. Scaling back to one of your points within that, you talked about Argentina and the sort of opportunity there. That's really interesting. It's a new jurisdiction that's it's coming online, it's showing willing. But are you finding that other jurisdictions, if I'm thinking about Chile, for example, what's going on there geopolitically, they're becoming perhaps regressive even, and they're sort of reducing the scope for high quality copper projects. Would you say that it's becoming more of a challenging environment to actually find quality projects overall?
I think Chile, just kind of taking a step back, it is by far the world's largest producer of copper. And so just to understand Chile's role in copper production, Chile produces over 25% of global copper output. The largest oil producer, which is Saudi Arabia, produces about 10% of global oil output. So Chile's role in copper is something that I think requires a lot of context. There's unquestionably been a slowdown in the recent past. Yep. As the country, I think, is trying to figure out its next path forward. So if you go back 2 years, they voted for the Constitutional Convention. I think people wanted to see. There were definitely some people in Chile who wanted to see some extreme changes. Yeah. But if you actually look at what's happened recently, it's been very encouraging. First of all, the constitution that was approved excluded a lot of the most drastic proposals that people had floated in regards to the country at large and the mining industry specifically. Second, even with those changes, if you actually look at what's happening right now, it's not even clear if this constitution gets approved, because I do think what you've seen in the country overall is much more of a sentiment change. And I don't think that they're quite as eager to scrap everything that they were doing for the previous 30 years to go into a different direction. And so I think what you've seen is a very typical sentiment change that happens in industrialized democracy, which Chile is. You go one way for a while, then you go a different way for a while. But one thing that we are very comfortable with is that Chile will continue producing a lot of copper, and there will be major new projects built in the country. I do think it may take a little bit of time for everyone to get used to where the country is today, which I think is very normal. When you look at where we've invested, we own 3 of the probably top 4 or 5 major copper development projects in the country: Vizcachitas, West Wall, Nueva Union. These are all very serious projects that really will need to be built for the energy transition to take place. And even if the energy transition didn't take place, they would still be likely to get built given where they sit in the overall copper universe. So I do think it might take a little while here for everyone to understand how things will work going forward. But everything we've seen so far suggests that Chile will continue playing its usual role. I do think Argentina probably has more momentum right now in terms of just overall support for the sector in a clear direction. I do think that's clear. At the same time, Argentina is starting from effectively scratch when you're talking about the copper sector. So I do think, and the geology is phenomenal. It's literally, you go across the border, there are some differences, but not that acute. So I do think you're seeing a lot of excitement. If you go to San Juan, I was there in December, everyone is super excited about mining. And it's refreshing to see at a time when the industry for sure is very much in its back foot in some places. So we've been very careful about where we invest for that reason. When you look at the Nova portfolio, we have obviously 2 major projects in Argentina, Salta, San Juan, which are very supportive. We have 3 projects in Chile, which is a long-term copper jurisdiction, is excellent. We have Aranzazu, which is our producing copper mine in Zacatecas, Mexico, which is really one of the most supportive mining jurisdictions anywhere you'll find, because you've got other major mines, you got Cozamin, you have Penasquito, you have Fresnillo, and then we have the Copper World complex in Arizona, and the reason we invested there is because it's private permitting. It's not U.S. federal permitting, it's 100% private land, which is a state process. Arizona is very supportive of mining on the state level. I think to the degree you've seen problems in the US, it's obviously been on the federal level, which is much more complex. I think it gets much more political. From that perspective, we have Dumont in Canada and Quebec, which is the most advanced nickel project probably in North America, at the very least, fully permitted with real scale. So we really made an effort to make sure that we invest in jurisdictions which are long-term supportive of the sector and where there's clear momentum to see things proceed. But you absolutely have to be much more careful. You don't need to read too far. I think in terms of what's happening in our sector, whether it's happening in Peru, whether it's happening in Ecuador or anywhere else. So you absolutely have to watch very carefully where you deploy your money.
Yep, absolutely. Excellent context there on jurisdictions. Okay, you mentioned a lot around the market conditions, particularly in the fact that it can be an opportunity for Nova. How are you taking advantage of the prevailing market conditions, and what do you? I'm thinking about this in a buying perspective. You acquire royalties on great projects, but what's the strategy from here? You've mentioned some of the requirements for near-term cash flow, sort of projects that look like they can get into production quickly. But anything else you can add around your strategy for playing this point in the market?
I mean, to be clear, when we started the company, we expected that there would be a time of sentiment like this. I think if you've been around long enough and you understand what's happening in the world, it was only a matter of time before you got into a place where I think a lot of people were questioning some fundamental assumptions. What we wanted to do was create a company that would be able to answer every question possible, which is why that we created Nova for the way it is. It has royalties on really some of the most blue chip projects out there. And really the initial opportunity in front of us that was executable was really acquiring royalties on these tier 1 development projects, because it's really just a unique point in time to grab projects that will be the core of the copper sector for many years to come. Now that we've got some reasonable size to Nova, I think the objective always was to fill in the cash flows more in the middle and the front end of the portfolio. And now with the company being in a much stronger position than it was in its early stages, it's really the perfect time to really just continue those conversations that we've been having with royalty holders for a long time now. So for us, it's, when we think about business development, it's not something that's a deal-oriented business. It's conversations you have with people for years, and our average transaction has taken over 12 months. So for us, it's very much of a it's very much of a long gestation business for us in terms of how deals get done. We've been very acquisitive, especially since going public. We've done 9 transactions in these 21 months, but it's a product of a lot of work that goes in beforehand. So we have a lot of pretty advanced, mature conversations going on, and I think the advantages of doing a deal with Nova right now, which is positioned to have a very strong future, well diversified and a high quality asset base, I think only grow. So I think that this is a great time for companies to get stronger. I do think what the market's clearly saying is that it wants to see stronger companies. There's absolutely, I don't think that you're going to be in a position where the current wave ends and then you go back to the way things used to be. I just don't see that happening. I do think global risks will remain high. I do think that's going to push up commodity prices because you see so much hunger for commodities everywhere, whether it's the energy transition, whether it's military, you clearly have a very high hunger for resources. At the same time, it's harder and harder to bring projects into production. As you can see, whether it's social, whether it's government, whether it's capital, there's just so many things to really pay attention to. You see the inflation figures being reported by everyone. It's really amazing, right? So I do think that where you're getting to in this space is you're going to see the really big, successful, strong miners do extraordinarily well, and other companies that position themselves, understanding that this is a time when really a relative handful of companies will do extraordinarily well and take advantage of the higher commodity prices. I do think a lot of companies will struggle despite high commodity prices because the difficulties of operating and the inflation and the like will eat away at a lot of those profits. So when I want to look at our portfolio and I see who is pushing those projects forward and I see what else we can add, I'm super excited about our future because I do think that we have a chance to emerge as something that's very unique here for investors to invest into.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the energy transition point that you touched on there, what can you tell us about copper in that role? And also, it seems the world's on something of a hydrocarbon binge, certainly in the short term, particularly with a supply squeeze, bit of an energy crisis in different regions. Do you see the energy transition speeding up from here or slowing down?
It's very difficult to see anything energy related slowing down right now. It's if there's anything we see is that it's a time of extreme perceived and real scarcity in the energy market. And I think one of the mistakes that the people make with the energy transition is think that copper would replace oil. I don't think that is a reasonable projection. Oil will always be, at least for the foreseeable future, a very large part of the energy mix. But if you look at what's happening with its oil, gas, clearly you should have alternatives to the standard sources. And obviously not just from perspective of geopolitical, but also environmental cleanliness and the like. So the copper's role, wind and solar's role, they're only going to continue to increase. I think people make the mistake of thinking they're going to replace olive oil and gas. I don't think that's realistic. And I don't think that was ever part of our thinking. But when you look at the amount of copper you're going to need just to make incremental gains in that oil and gas market share, you're looking at something that is going to be a multiple really of what you're able to do at the moment. So the way we think about it is it's a critical commodity. People will look to attain energy independence any way they possibly can. So even if you have ample oil and gas supplies, having the ability to have your own wind and solar that is completely self-contained becomes extremely valuable and strategic because you really cannot count on anything in today's world. So I do think that people that are smart and think about their business in a systematic way will make sure they have an oversupply of potential energy sources. I mean, at least, that is the only logical way to think about it. It's like food, same thing. When you look at the global economy, you're going through an interesting shift because the things you took for granted before, availability of energy, availability of metal, availability of food, are actually not, you cannot take them for granted anymore. You actually have to seriously think about it, make sure you have ample supplies. Discretionary items such as social media are probably more expendable. And so I think that you're seeing probably the beginning of you're still at the very early stages of a shift in a global economy in going from discretionary items to essentials. And the thing with essentials is you need to oversupply your essentials. You cannot just in time your essentials. I think anybody understands that. So I think when you talk about the essential things, and copper is clearly very much in a discussion among those essential commodities, I do think you're going to need a lot more of it available to you either today or potentially. And that's why I think the scarcity element will only get more serious, irrespective of how the short-term energy mix progresses, because obviously EU just went through with uranium and natural gas being considered green. I think that's great because, it goes back into the same overabundance thing. Or you need to oversupply your energy needs. But that doesn't mean that you can go take it easy on something else. You need to make sure that you have everything running at the same time to make sure that you never run into a scarcity situation. Because if you have a scarcity situation, what happens? Your economy shuts down. And then you have nothing. You can't heat your homes, you can't run your factories, and you're basically just standing still. So you really cannot take any chances with energy supplies. And I think that you'll see that thesis play through more and more. So really, we're the early stages here, no question.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's bring it all back into Nova as a company. What compounds investors to own Nova at this moment in time? What's the common thread, throughout all of these key points that we've touched on at the moment?
Well, it's really, I think, as exciting a time as ever, because when you look at what we've done so far, we built a great foundation. Our key projects are moving ahead toward production. We've built up critical mass really in the most valuable sector we think that exists, which is the tier 1 copper projects. We cover most of our G&A now from the Aranzazu royalty, which has done great with 3/4 of record production, which is a great start. But what we're really building, we think, is the best way to participate in this entire theme. Because you have exposure to a critical commodity, you have exposure to critical projects, which if history is any guide, these projects have a way of expanding significantly over time. In terms of capital and operating costs, we're not exposed to those. And as the company really builds out its the near-term middle run cash flows, which are very, very focused on right now, it really becomes, we think, the best risk-adjusted investment in the whole space. So there's an enormous potential here for a re-rating, whether that's project upside, whether that's commodity price upside, whether that's just the overall risk level, perceived risk level going down. You're really building something that we think can be a must-own for people for many years to come, and you're still very early stage. It's still a relatively young company, which is just emerging. So hopefully people can really see the future here, and then obviously from the fundamentals we've put in place and what we're trying to do, and it really creates, I think, a great opportunity for many different investors to participate right now.
Fantastic. Excellent stuff, Alex. It's been really insightful speaking with you and getting an update on the projects and the portfolio. And of course, we look forward to catching up on how those are progressing and potential new deals for Nova later in the year. So thanks for speaking with Assay TV.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.